Welcome back to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In today's episode, I talk with Katrina Oko-Odoi, PhD, co-owner of the dissertation editing and coaching agency, EditingWorm. Katrina earned her PhD in literature from UC San Diego and began freelance editing while she was in graduate school. Observing various challenges of academic life, from departmental politics to student behavior, Katrina realized early on that she wanted to have more control over her career and her life than a traditional academic job would offer. So she and her husband started their company EditingWorm in 2011. Over the last 13 years, EditingWorm has grown into a boutique editing and coaching agency that employs 5 freelance academic editors and 2 research methodologists who guide graduate students through the dissertation writing process and toward graduation. In our conversation, Katrina shares her journey from graduate student to freelance editor and full-fledged entrepreneur. She offers several tips to scholars who are considering a career or side hustle in editing. And she gives us her thoughts on whether or not AI tools will pose a threat to academic editors in the years to come. I hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, please help me spread the word by writing a quick review and subscribing to the channel. Then share this episode with your friends and colleagues. Now, here's my interview with Katrina. Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening. All right. Welcome to the podcast, Katrina.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your experience in academia and what you did after you finished your PhD.
Yeah, definitely. So I received my PhD in literature with a Spanish specialization from the University of California, San Diego. My research focus was 20th century Latin American and Latinx, Chicanx literature and cultural studies. And throughout my graduate program, I was an instructor. I taught Spanish language and Spanish literature and then some writing courses. And I chose at the end not to go on to the academic job market. So by that point, when I was writing my dissertation, I was already doing some freelance editing. And so I basically completed my dissertation and stepped directly into an editing career, basically running my own business. And my husband and I founded our company EditingWorm in 2011. And we primarily offer dissertation and thesis editing and formatting services. So I was kind of fortunate to know exactly what I was going to do and to be able to step into that. I think a lot of people don't necessarily have it all figured out quite yet, but it worked out really well for me.
So when you were a grad student, how did you discover editing?
So I've been a writer since I was a child. Like I had poetry published when I was 11. So just language and writing has always come really naturally to me. I believe since undergrad, I was kind of editing just informally for friends and colleagues, like if they needed help with their essays or their application, statements and purpose and things like that. So it was just like, I didn't necessarily have like the technical skills to know all of the, style guide standards, but just helping other people learn how to express themselves better through writing. And then as a graduate student, I was fortunate that at UC San Diego in the literature department, they had a listserv for kind of like job opportunities. So there were a few freelance editing opportunities that came up that I just applied for. And it was very kind of low bar because it was, if you're a grad student, you can have this, you can have this opportunity. So I ended up editing for one professor of religion who was a non-native speaker. So he needed, just an extra set of eyes. And then for a Latin American studies anthology, they needed an editor. So I helped with that as well. And then also through that same listserv, I was able to connect with a publisher who worked, it was like a subcontractor for Gale, and they developed cultural and literary encyclopedias. And so I started writing and editing encyclopedia entries for them. And that was actually one of my first clients that I had when I was a grad student that I carried through after grad school. So that was kind of, those were really, really great entry points for me. And it also helped me kind of build my portfolio before I stepped out of academia.
So it sounds like you've always had an affinity for writing and were able to develop those editing skills in graduate school. And obviously, if you have a PhD, you're familiar with scholarly literature and how it's supposed to sound and the dissertation writing process and all that. So how did you know, or at what point did you decide you didn't want to go into academia? I mean, I would think you entered the PhD program planning to do something like that. And at what point did you figure out that you really prefer to just become an editor and start your own company?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was after I qualified and probably early in the dissertation writing process. By that point, I've been teaching at some level for a few years, and I just there were a few things that I wasn't as happy with as I expected when I went into grad school. I think, there's so much mystique around being a professor and, faculty in general. But then getting a peek behind the curtain as a grad student, I found a lot of departmental politics and bureaucracy, infighting between professors, and as a grad student being pitted between professors, not understanding that there were dynamics that were beyond me. And then also just struggled to find a support network. There was very little guidance for grad students at that point in time for how to write a dissertation and all of that, which, I mean, of course, once you get into becoming a professor, you're beyond that point. But the other thing that I think, and it was the main reason why I decided not to go into academia, was that I didn't find teaching as rewarding as I had anticipated. I encountered a lot of students who were disengaged and had a high sense of entitlement. And in retrospect, I think that has a lot to do with the specific student population at that university. But between the politics, bureaucracy, and then the challenges with teaching, I realized that I wanted a career that I would have more control and freedom in, and that was not going to be academia for me.
Yeah, I love that. I think I had a lot of the same feelings that you did, the same realizations, but I just kept going because it was like what we were supposed to do. All my advisors said, oh, you've been offered a job in this city and you hate this city. You don't want to live there. Well, just take it anyway. And, you'll go on the market again and get a job somewhere else. As if it takes no effort or time or stress to do all of that, And so I kept doing what I was told for several years until I realized this sucks. I'm miserable. Why am I still doing what everybody's telling me when this is horrible advice? So it's great that you realized that early on and had the courage to go out and do it, make your own path. And you said, you wanted to have more control over your life and your business and all of your career. And I think that's so true because that's another lie that we're sold, that academia is so flexible. I've heard so many people say, I don't want to give up my academic job because I'll have to work 9 to 5 or I'm going to lose that flexibility. And I'm going, it's not flexible if you work 7 days a week, like,
you take all your work home with you.
Yeah. And I think, owning your own business is the most flexibility you can possibly have, right? So tell us that part of the story. How did you decide to start this business? Did you continue building up your freelance work on your own for a bit? Or how did you decide to create the business EditingWorm?
Well, so I mean, part of it has to do with the encouragement of my husband and his background, because he has a strong background in sales and marketing. And I had been exposed to like small business ownership because I worked for like a family-owned marketing agency when I was in high school and at the beginning of college. And I had this impression of like it just being incredibly like consuming of your entire life, because I saw the owner of that agency and she was just working all the time and very stressed. And I was like, so my husband suggested, why don't we start our own business and you can just do this full time? And I was like, I don't want it to like consume my life. But luckily he was able to convince me, and he's like, no, it won't. You get to decide, we get to decide together, like how we want to run it and what we want to do. And we can say yes, or we can say no. So, we started the company, but at that time, it was just, we had a website and we registered for, an LLC. And then it was just myself doing most of the editing work. And he was kind of behind the scenes with the website maintenance and accounting and things. So we had a business, but we didn't have like other employees or anything. And so I was on some of the freelance platforms, so I was able to find some clients that way. And then early on, we also connected with a couple other professional services providers in that space. So other specifically dissertation coaches. And there was one kind of main company at the time that was very established. And I was fortunate enough to connect with the owner, and she really valued my expertise, and it was kind of complementary to what they offered. So we established a strategic partnership. And I would have to say that that was really what helped make us successful, was being fed leads from them, because they were more established and they would get a lot of traffic to their website. They had a lot of clients already. And so I can't say enough as a business owner about the importance of having those types of like strategic partnerships. And since then we've gone on and we've established similar relationships with a few other providers. And that's been really effective and successful for us. And I also I'm of the mindset that a high tide rises all boats, right? So I don't really look at it as like competition with other academic editors. I think there's enough business to go around. And it's also about finding the right fit, because one editor might not be a good fit for one individual. And maybe, you can send them to someone else who might fit their, whatever it is, what their budgetary needs or the style of editing that they're looking for, or even if you just don't have bandwidth at a certain point in time. So that's kind of how we've grown. And so we've been in business over 10 years now. And really the reason that I started the company was based on my own graduate experience, feeling like there wasn't enough support for graduate students and guidance. And so aside from editing, we've kind of added on some additional services that I don't necessarily do all of them myself, but we have a team of editors, researchers, and methodologists and statistician. So we also now offer statistical analysis services for individuals who are like in the social sciences and need help with either qualitative or quantitative data analysis. We have some research services to like support individuals working through their literature review process, as well as we do now also offer dissertation coaching. And I think the most enjoyable part of it for me is really kind of the mentorship role that I'm able to play, because even when I'm, the service that we're delivering is editing, we're very involved and is a collaborative process. And so I find it really rewarding to be able to, work closely with a student, help them become better writers through the guidance that we provide in our editing, and then, see them succeed and achieve their goals. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no. So it sounds like you started out with this partnership with a dissertation coach or several of them, and maybe they were in the role of helping the students stay on track and meet their writing deadlines, but they weren't really interested in doing the editing side of things. And so that's where they sort of passed them off to you. Am I getting that right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I love what you said about how you don't worry about competition, because that's been a concern that's come up as people, I teach this course on becoming an academic editor where I help faculty and other people in higher ed learn how to start an editing business. And that's one of their biggest concerns is there enough work out there? And I always kind of have to chuckle because I think I looked it up one time. There's tens of thousands of PhDs, right, just in the United States, let alone around the world. And no, not all of them will work with editors, but so many of them do, especially when they're in the dissertation phase and they're facing, having to format the dissertation and do all of that stuff that is just so miserable, especially at the end of your dissertation process. Of course, now for people like us, it's pretty easy to do when you've done it 100 times. But when you're just going through the first time, it can be really a struggle. So yeah, I love that you said it's not about competition, and not only the fact that there's plenty of work out there, but also that, like you said, we all have different styles and personalities, and somebody will go to my website and look at it and think, oh, she looks fantastic, she's a great match for me. And somebody else will go to it and say, no, this isn't really my style, and it's sort of, I think, by putting your website and your social media out there, you let the clients choose what it is that they're attracted to and who they think is a good fit for them. So yeah, I agree completely. I think there's plenty of work, and just everybody has a different style and personality that's going to attract different types of clients. So I'm curious about the operation of an agency like yours. So how did you, just, as a fellow business owner, I'm learning that it's so hard to make these decisions. What is my next step? How do I grow the business? Do I pursue this effort or that effort? And it can be tough. I mean, you had your husband, but you're still sort of isolated, right? And trying to figure out how to do all this stuff. So how did you proceed? And you started in 2011, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did you proceed with figuring out, how you would grow the business?
Yeah. That's a really important comment, because it's not like I was a natural business owner. And I especially struggle with sales conversations and pricing and all that. So that's been something that I've kind of had to get over. But one thing that I did that I would highly recommend was, in those early days, I joined, it was a co-working group, but I would say I joined a networking group. It wasn't for academics. It was just a small business owner, entrepreneur networking group. And the one that I joined in San Diego was a female networking group. It was Hera Hub. They actually have co-working spaces throughout the US. And so I was able to, number one, get out of my house, go work at this co-working space while interacting with these other business owners. And it was really nice because there were people at different stages of their business growth. So I was able to kind of find a couple mentors. There were other individuals who were also writers, or there weren't really any editors, but there were a few other people who were from academia and were doing translation or some similar things. And through that also, there were boot camps that I took, and workshops that were just focused more on the basics of building your business. So that really helped me just kind of immerse myself in that small business world and get a little bit more comfortable with, what does that look like? Who am I as a business owner, and just kind of owning that identity. So I would highly recommend that. And it wasn't necessarily I didn't necessarily get a lot of work through there because there weren't a lot of academics, but it was just more like professional growth opportunities for myself. So that was one thing. And aside from that, I think it's mostly like learning as I went. I think the one thing I would say is it's important to be flexible and not too proud to either admit that you're wrong or be willing to pivot and try something else if something isn't working. So, we've been in business 13 years now. We've been through one major, we started on the tail end of a major recession, and then we went through COVID. And so there's been points where it's been scary. Are we going to make it? Are we going to lose too much business? And obviously there's ups and downs, but I think because we've always kind of remained flexible and been willing to kind of try different things, whether it's different type of marketing or, like I said, we've expanded our services, even the way we structure payments, offering flexible payment options and things like that. All of those things have been kind of trial and error and figuring out what works for us. And what works for our business isn't necessarily what works for somebody else's business, but it's just feeling it out and what works and what feels right for EditingWorm and myself specifically.
Yeah, I think that having that community can be so helpful because I didn't know anything about running a business either. And, when you're just one editor, you figure out how to attract clients. It's not that hard, but it's a very small, contained project, and then when I think I started developing my course and trying to figure out how to sell that and market it, that became this whole other animal where I didn't have any expenses before, it was my laptop and my Microsoft Word subscription or whatever, very low risk in terms of starting a business. And now it's I have to pay for the course platform and the email program and, training on things. And I listened to probably 100 hours of podcasts as I drove back and forth picking up my kids from school, and
yeah.
I wish that I had gotten involved earlier in some kind of business community or something. Now I've done coaching and I'm going to do a mastermind next year and, learn from other people who know more than I do. But I wish I had done that sooner because it can help so much, just to speed up the process of learning. And having people to talk to, I think, something I've really enjoyed about doing these podcasts is actually getting to talk with people more often, who have similar backgrounds. But so what does your business look like today? How many freelancers do you employ? How many coaches? What is the structure there?
We're still not huge. I mean, I really like our boutique model because it was just too overwhelming to me to run a huge business. So basically today I play the role of kind of the account manager. So I'm basically interfacing with the leads that come in, having phone calls, setting up the project. And then we have about 5 contract editors that work with us. So I kind of match them with projects based on their degree and their area of expertise. And so I set it all up, I tee it all up. I have a brief that I provide them with all the details for what is needed for this particular client. And then they complete the editing, send it back. And we have a senior editor who does a final review. And so kind of checks and makes sure there's nothing missing and just a second set of eyes kind of thing. And then I do a final once over and then we send it back to the client. So I am still heavily involved in the process. But as far as coaching right now, I'm I'm the only one doing coaching. We haven't gotten to the point where we need an additional coach, but I think because we have an agency model, we have a very large, like strong network of academics who are in the space. So it wouldn't be difficult to like expand that and find someone who would be willing to come on part-time to support that need if it arose. And then we have a statistician and a methodologist who specifically come in and help. Like if a student needs help with their methodology chapter or their results chapter, we will have a traditional academic editor, but then we'll also have it reviewed by the methodologist or statistician to make sure that on the technical end, everything is accurate and presented correctly. And then on the business side, my husband still is in the background. He's a graphic designer and kind of web developer. So he does the website and marketing. And then we like have an accountant on the side kind of thing. So that's how we're still very small, but I'm thankful for how successful we've been, and we've been able to support our family doing this. So it's been a blessing.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I really respect that, because I remember as I was building my business, I got to the point where, I was approaching like the 6-figure mark just by myself. And I knew that I wanted to take it to the next level, but I felt like there was this fork in the road where either I could go the agency model or I could go like developing a course or something like that. And I had this idea for this becoming an editor course. And I realized that I didn't want to supervise anyone, like I didn't want to have people working for me that I would have to check their work and all that stuff. And so, I ended up going the other route. But yeah, I think that speaks to just the flexibility in business, that like you can start in one place and never imagine that 5 years later or 10 years later, you're going to have this whole other thing, or that the business is going to evolve into something that you never imagined. So yeah. And if you ever get sick of doing something, you can always just change it, right? Like you said,
Yes.
Or if you feel like it's not working out, you can just change your plan. So I'm curious, in sort of this bigger picture, how have you seen academic editing change in the last 10 or 15 years that you've been doing this? What are some of the changes that you think you've observed?
I mean, I do feel like it is. I think when I started, it wasn't as widespread or like not as many people knew that this was a thing, right? Like I would tell people I'm an editor, and even people in academia didn't necessarily like understand that there were professional editors that they could hire. I think that has definitely changed. And one of the other things that has benefited us is there are some universities that do require graduate students to hire an outside editor of their theses or dissertations before they submit it to their university. And there's some universities that actually have like a list of recommended or approved editors. So we've been able to get on a few of those. So I think, and there's also always like that ethical question, right? Of like, is it ethically okay for me to hire an editor? Does that mean that I'm, doing something wrong? So I think because it's more widespread and known about now, people have like less qualms or concerns about hiring an editor, where in the past, maybe they had some reservations about it. But I also think that the market has become more saturated, and there's a lot more companies or individuals from other countries who are offering services. So for the client, on the client side, I think it's harder to discern, who is like a legitimate professional editor that is a native speaker and that has like the skills and knowledge needed to perform that quality level of edits that people are looking for. So I think we've definitely seen kind of like an increase in people who come to us who have been burned by a previous editor who claimed to be able to do this, and then they delivered shoddy work or just disappeared on them after taking their money. So in that context, it's hard to see that as a business owner because being a upstanding, ethical business owner, and it's hard to see people get scammed. But I guess that's just kind of part of the reality of today. And then in the most recent years, of course, now generative artificial intelligence, Gen AI, has emerged. And I think that is obviously impacting both the editing and writing spaces. I've anecdotally heard professors say that like their students use ChatGPT or something similar to edit their work for them. I don't think it's very effective. So I'm not super concerned about it from like a competition standpoint. I think if anything, it's going to be like right now we're in this moment where people are so fascinated and obsessed with AI, but then I think there's going to be a turning point where they realize it's not as good as they think it is, and they're going to kind of bounce back to really highly valuing like skilled human beings who are able to do that type of work.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question for you, was what you think about AI, because that's another question I get a lot, is like people who are thinking about going into editing, they're worried that it's going to, or people who are already editors, they're worried it's going to take our jobs. And I wrote a blog post on this about a year ago where I took parts of my dissertation and I introduced errors, just like grammatical punctuation errors, and I fed it through ChatGPT and I asked it to edit these sections, and it did a terrible job. It caught a few things, but then it introduced a bunch of other errors. And even if you use something like Grammarly, it's not perfect. It doesn't get the whole context. Maybe it catches a few punctuation things that you might miss if you're reading really quickly, but it can never do what a human does. And certainly in terms of like the moral support that we provide, the motivation, I've had so many grad students who I can tell in their emails, they're just so stressed out and overwhelmed. And I can tell them, don't worry about it. You're almost done. We're on the tail end of this. Like, you're going to be okay. And they're grateful for that, and AI is never going to be able to, I mean, maybe not never, but not in our lifetimes. We're never going to be able to provide that kind of support. But yeah, that's another thing I've noticed because I've gotten a lot of work from different Facebook groups with grad students, and you'll see people post in there asking for an editor. And then there's all these other people who just say like, oh, email me at like dissertation-edits@yahoo.com or something, and I try to say like, somebody should have a website, or at least a legit looking LinkedIn profile, or, like, don't just hire somebody who has a Gmail or a Yahoo address. You have to really vet people the way that you would any other business if you're hiring a plumber or a hairdresser or a whatever, like you're not just going to go to somebody's backyard and ask them to cut your hair, So I do think that does seem to be getting more and more prevalent. I think just with the internet, people saying they can do something and not really providing any kind of testimonials or proof or anything like that. But
yeah, and one thing that we do offer is a sample edit, like a free sample edit. So I would say like if you're considering hiring an editor, always check out their credentials. Like what is their degree in? Like you said, do they have testimonials? And then do they offer a free sample edit? Like we offer a 2-page sample edit. And I think that's helpful for individuals who are maybe like concerned about editing like style and if it would be a good match. Just to, get a quick idea of like, well, this is how we use track changes, and this is the kind of feedback we provide. This is what we'll change for you, and this is where we will provide a comment for you to make a change, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or even just like pick up the phone and have a conversation with the
That too.
person, Like I find a lot of people
Definitely.
prefer to communicate over email, which I do too, but I always offer everybody a free 15-minute call just to talk to me and realize that I am a real person and I do know what I'm talking about, and you're not going to get scammed. So
Yeah, and I think a good professional editor should always be available over phone or email. Of course, like there's limitations, right? You're not going to have a hour-long conversation unless it's built into whatever engagement. But yeah, being able to, if there's questions, just jump on a quick call to clear things up. And that just helps build trust and rapport with, especially graduate students. Like you mentioned, they're usually so stressed out and overwhelmed, and they just need a little bit of reassurance that everything's going to be okay and that you are handling this for them so they can kind of not stress about, the Oxford comma or whatever it is.
Yeah, creating the table of contents seems to be the biggest, or the lists of tables and figures.
Yes.
So, if you were talking to somebody who is thinking about going to become a freelance academic editor or coach, if somebody who has an academic background, what's a couple of pieces of advice you would give them for starting out in their career?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought about that. And I mean, one thing that I would definitely recommend is joining the Editorial Freelancers Association. I think that's a great professional association that you can become a member for, I think it's like about $200, and get access to a bunch of resources. And they offer seminars and workshops that are just, bite-sized little resources that can help you get a feel for different types of editing. And then they also do have a job board where you can get access to freelance opportunities. So that's one thing. I think the thing about being an academic, especially if you're in the humanities, is you are already doing so much writing. So I think as a researcher and professor, you already have an idea of like, do you have the knack for it, right? Like, is that one of the things that you enjoy about your job right now? If you're a teacher, do you enjoy reading your students' papers and providing them with feedback? I remember when I was teaching, I would always like have to like hold myself back from like editing all of the papers, and instead of just provide a little bit of overarching feedback. But so if you're naturally prone to that, then I think that's a good sign that this might be a great career for you. But I'm also a big advocate for like testing the waters first before you take a big leap. So if you're able to, find a small freelancing opportunity where you can kind of test it out first, I would highly recommend that. And I think if you are in an institution, there are often opportunities that it might be easier to just like support a colleague with reviewing and editing their journal article or what have you. Even if it's for free, I think just getting the experience is really important. And then the last thing I would say is, I think with any business, but even with editing, finding a niche is really important. So it's easy to like go out and say, hey world, I'm an academic editor, but that's like a very large space. The more you can drill down and have a specialty, the easier it'll be to, number one, target a specific audience, and number two, become incredibly skilled and successful in that one certain area. So, when we hire freelance editors to work on our team, we're often looking for an editor with a specialty in a specific style guide, for example. So Chicago style, or there's so much need for technical editors on the sciences side. So if you specialize in technical editing and you work in AMA or something like that, or even like the medical sciences field. I think the more you can niche down and then find ways to hone those specific skills, training in MLA style or APA style, the better you'll be able to serve your client base and find the right clients.
Yeah, that's such a great point, because when you specialize, well, I think a lot of people coming in are afraid to go too narrow because they're worried, like, oh, I don't want to turn down work. What if I specialize in biology, but some historian comes and needs their book edited? I don't want to turn that work away. I don't think you have to turn it away necessarily if you think you can do a good job in the beginning. But yeah, I agree. If you could specialize in a citation style, in a subfield, you're just going to hone those skills so much more effectively. You're going to become a more accurate and much more efficient editor. You're going to be able to work so much faster because if you're always using APA, then you're going to know it like the back of your hand. And so you'll usually make more money if you can work faster, if you're doing a per word rate. And yeah, you're just going to be able to help the client so much better. So that's a great suggestion, is don't be afraid to get specific and focus on a particular area that you really enjoy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for talking with me. I've really enjoyed learning about your business and your journey and all that. So if anybody would like to work with you or EditingWorm, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is just to go to our website. So it's EditingWorm, WORM.com. And we're also active on LinkedIn and Facebook. But yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody. I publish a lot of resources, especially on LinkedIn. There's articles and tips and stuff. So feel free to follow myself and our company on there. And thank you so much for having me. It is refreshing talking to another editor and just kind of connecting, right? Because it can be isolating. So it's great just chatting.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe we'll have to get a bunch of people together and do like an editor's happy hour or something sometime.
That would be so fun.
All right. Thanks, Katrina.
Thank you.
If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.